Tánaiste, thanks for coming in to us. A momentous day yesterday with the Windsor Framework. Are you confident, though, it can pave the way for a pretty early return of the power sharing executive in Northern Ireland?
Well, it is a very significant day, and I think it does signal a new chapter in the relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union in the first instance, which I think is very important, given the broader geopolitical issues we are facing with the war in Ukraine, energy crisis, climate change, and the need for Europe and the UK to be in harmony on those fundamental issues. And also in respect, obviously, of Northern Ireland, our main objective is to have the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement restored, the Assembly and the Executive up and running. I think it's fair that people would be given opportunity to examine what is a very comprehensive package of documentation that is emanated from these negotiations, which have been going on for some months. And talking to Maroš Šefčovič last Sunday week, I mean, literally a lot of the team there are exhausted given the level of input. Every file looked at under the protocol and the trading agreement. So I think it's fair that people would have an opportunity to examine it. But I do, notwithstanding that, and parallel with this, I've always been of the view that the institution should be back. The people of Northern Ireland deserve that their vote matters and that the people they elected get into the Assembly and into the Executive. And above all, people who create jobs in Northern Ireland, business and industry, want certainty. These negotiations give certainty in terms of the trading relationship, in terms of the basic fact now that the goods, food and so on will be on the shelves of Northern Ireland supermarkets as in the UK. There won't be any difference in relation to any aspect of that. Medicines will be available in Northern Ireland as they will be in the UK, same time and under the same circumstances. And so that certainty will be there. Other sectors that were doing well anyway, such as manufacturing and the food industry, will be the sigh of relief because it retains what they were looking for in terms of the positives that have emerged for them in terms of their sectors. But now the political certainty is required, political stability is required. I think the people of Northern Ireland deserve that. And to give people a decent quality of life in terms of all of those key issues.
You will have been on the inside and won't have been surprised what came out yesterday. I have to say, when I was watching the coverage, I was kind of surprised at what exactly was on offer. There was huge compromise from the EU. Jeffrey Donaldson was proven right, wasn't he, to play hardball here?
Well, I think
we all thought he was just saying no for the sake of it, but he's actually got a lot of what he wanted.
He has. But to be fair, for a while we've all been saying that legitimate issues had been raised by political parties in Northern Ireland. All political parties would have raised issues around the free movement, the free flow of goods from the GB to Northern Ireland. But unionism did raise specific issues. And the EU has listened, and there was goodwill between the British government and the EU from the outset of these particular set of and phase of negotiations, and you can never underestimate the importance of goodwill. In other words,
or the importance of having a grown-up in the room in the shape of Rishi Sunak as opposed to some of his predecessors.
Well, I think Rishi Sunak made up his mind when he was elected Prime Minister he was going to resolve this. He can see the greater good for the UK in having a sensible, and structured and harmonious relationship with the European Union. Absolutely. If you note the language, partners, friends, joint solutions.
I mean, there was warmth in that room yesterday that wasn't there previously.
Correct. And the EU would say to us that this was no longer an engagement that was just about raising problems. The UK government came to the table with problems and challenges, but also with solutions and proposals. And so you had both teams working together to solve it, to resolve issues. And what struck me early on is talking to the EU team and indeed to the UK team, trust had built up between the two negotiating teams from early on. I pay tribute to Maroš Šefčovič, to Rishi Sunak, James Cleverly and Chris Heaton-Harris with the British Irish Intergovernmental Conference. It was very clear to us that they were in solution mode. And a lot of people will probably underestimate the level of detail they had to go into and the exhaustive nature of these discussions and negotiations. And this hasn't been easy on both negotiating teams. And I think because EU law is complex, EU trading relationships are complex, particularly with third countries and so on.
Can I ask you bluntly, though, did it help that Lord Frost wasn't in the room? Did it help that Boris Johnson wasn't in the room?
Well, I don't want to get into personality, Shane, but I'll put it this way to you. If the will is there to arrive at a solution, you can arrive at the solution.
Okay.
If the will fundamentally isn't there, then you will not. And you know my views on, I always felt that over a year ago, maybe over October, 12 months, Lord Frost did intervene in what was then a set of proposals that had come from the EU Commission and Maros Sefcovic before they even got off the starting ground, and I didn't think that was particularly helpful at the time. But that said, we now are in a much better position.
Does it worry you when you hear the likes of Ian Paisley saying that this deal doesn't cut the mustard, or even maybe that might be expected, but even Jeffrey Donaldson saying there can be no disguising the fact that in some sectors of our economy, EU law remains applicable in Northern Ireland? Does that kind of slightly worry you a little bit?
But the key issue here is everybody I speak to in Northern Ireland wants to maintain access to the European single market. So there has to be frameworks to manage that.
Yeah.
And also access to the GB market.
But you know that constitutional issue is so important. The Act of Union.
But the British Supreme Court has resolved that. I mean, there was a challenge to the original protocol. And the British courts are very clear. It does not in any shape or form undermine the constitutional status of Northern Ireland within the UK and the principle of consent enshrined as in the Good Friday Agreement. So that these trading arrangements do not in any shape or form undermine the constitutional status of Northern Ireland as enshrined in the Good Friday Agreement. Europe is very clear about that. Everybody is at this stage, and legally that is the position. Politically it's the position also. And if you remember, what gave rise to a lot of this was, in the early days of the operation of the protocol, was certain goods not on the shelves of Northern Ireland supermarkets, and a lot of it was on the consumer side of it.
Yeah.
That's now been comprehensively dealt with.
Okay.
Issues arose in relation to medicines. That has been definitively and comprehensively dealt with. Issues arose in relation to pets, for example, VAT, state aid. All of those issues have been dealt with now. It's very difficult to see what remaining issues there are in respect of this.
Okay, a couple more things on this. Do you have any concern? I mean, the Stormont break, as it's been called, was brought in for very obvious reasons to assuage unionist concerns. Do you, though, have any concern that it could lead to a divergence of standards between North and South?
Well, I've always had a different, I stand back from a lot of this, and people in industry and business will tell you the market determines standards, the market that you're exporting into. So I think people need
regulations also determine standards.
But again, but I think most industry and business if you want to export into a particular market, you're going to have to adjust in practical terms to meet the requirements of that market. But in a broader sense, in terms of other regulations and that, I think it does make sense that representatives of the Northern Assembly and stakeholders more generally would have input in the early stages of any new regulations coming into play, in advance of them coming into play. And I think Europe has always been clear that they have no difficulty with that. In fact, that's a general principle around EU regulations in any event. And I think that's been facilitated in this agreement. And in terms of the specific issue that you've referenced there, in the event of something emerging that would have a persistent impact on Northern Ireland, then a brake could be put on that by 30 MLAs making representations to the UK government, and there's a process for doing that. But in advance of it ever getting to that stage, there are mechanisms within the trading agreement, such as the Joint Committee and so on, where issues would be amicably resolved.
Just finally, this. I mean, I know you stressed, and quite rightly, that the DUP deserve time to look through this very complex document. But are you encouraged by the mood music over the last 24 hours, and in particular in Westminster? It would seem that this deal is going to get general approval, if not unanimous approval. Do you think we will have agreement from the DUP? Do you think in a year's time, for example, the institutions will be back up and running?
But again, I think what's interesting this time around, both the government in the UK and the European Union negotiating team and the Commission both own this agreement, and no one is kind of shying away from the agreement. They've both signed off on it. That in itself is a significant decision. It's a matter for the DUP ultimately to decide. But I do believe that the people of Northern Ireland want the government. The people of Northern Ireland want the decision that they made in the last election validated in the form of the convening of the Assembly, the election of an executive, First Minister and Deputy First Minister, that can deal with the issues that affect people in Northern Ireland in their daily lives. And I think the ground has been set to facilitate and to enable all of that.
And Rishi Sunak is someone clearly you can do business with. That's been made pretty obvious, isn't it?
He's a professional politician who clearly has, in my view, a clear roadmap ahead of him in terms of what he wants to do. And when I met him before Christmas, he was very clear he wanted to have a negotiated resolution of these issues with the European Union. That is what has transpired. And I think the European Union have been responsive, but also do get that sense from the UK government in terms of that desire to have a better relationship into the future. I think it's informed by what's going on internationally. The war on Ukraine in particular has created real serious issues, and the polarisation of the world. Countries that are in the rule-based multilateral framework, such as the UK, US, European Union, Japan, ASEAN countries and so on, they're coming together to uphold the multilateral order. And that may seem distant from the protocol and everything else, but actually it is the background.
It fed into it.
It is a significant background to a lot of rethinking that's going on in terms of the future, and given the very serious issues that we're facing in Europe with the war in Ukraine.